What am I supposed to do with that thing? The last thing that's missing from our user interface, it's a way to see all the stats of our spells, because right now it's not really possible to do that, but we want the player to be able to see what are the cost of the spell, what are the damage of the spell, the range. So that's what we're gonna do today, and actually we're gonna use a new feature that we didn't use in the project yet, and that feature is the tooltip. So we're gonna make that if the player moves his mouse over a UI element, so a button, an image or something, we're going to display a tooltip showing all the statistics of the spells, and that should make our job way easier. So let's get to it. So in Unreal, the first thing I'm going to do is import myself some new textures we want to use in today's user interface. So I have a few new range patterns that I want to display, and also I have a bunch of new icons. So I'm going to start with my range patterns right here and drop them inside the spell icon folder. So here they are with all the other spell patterns, and now for all the other icons, I'm going to select them and drop them inside the UI folder. So here they are with all the other icons. So I'm going to save all that now. All these icons are going to be available on Patreon, but if you want to copy them, I'm just going to zoom a little bit. Okay, so here I have a few icons for the new range we want to display. Then I have two icons to add and subtract action point from the units. Then I have an icon for the cooldown, one for the damage, the healing, and the HP. And then I have one for the line of sight, one for the maximum amount of time we can cast the spell during our turn, and then two last ones to add or subtract the movement point from the unit. So here they are. So these are all the icons we're going to use today. And now that we have imported everything we needed, it's time to start working for real. So the first thing I'm going to do though is creating myself a new helper widget, because if I go in my combat spell widget right here, in my combat unit info, I'm just going to open that one. Here in the middle, we can see that we have an icon and a text telling me how many action points this unit currently has. And then on the right, I have the same thing. I have an icon and a text on the right telling me how many movement points the unit has. So we're really reusing the same widget component. So we have the same horizontal box, image, scale box, and then the text on both sides. So instead of having to copy paste all those components every time we want to reproduce this structure in a widget somewhere, we can simply put that inside another widget that we can reuse multiple places in the project. And that's actually what we're going to do today, because in our spell information, we have multiple stats to display to the user. So we're going to have the cost of the spell, so in action point, but we also have the cost of the spell in movement point, how much damage the spell is going to do, how much healing the spell is going to do, what's the range, what's the cooldown, what's the maximum amount of time we can cast it during the turn, etc. So we're really going to reuse that same structure of widget components multiple times in the same widget. So instead of just duplicating all those components every time, I'm just going to paste them all in one widget blueprint that we can reuse. So let's go create it. I'm going to go back in this folder right here in my widget and create myself a new widget blueprint. I'm going to name it image underscore with text, because we want an image with a text on the side. I'm just going to open it to add my components in there. And here they are. So here it is. I have all my components. And if we go back in the other widget, we can see that they are the same components. So I have my horizontal box, image, scale box, and text right here. And I have the same thing in my new widget. So I have my horizontal box, image, scale box, and text, and they all have the same parameters. The only thing I added is the size box right here above the image. So we can easily decide the size of the image depending of where in the project we want to reuse this widget. So now I'm just going to go through all the components with you to show you the settings. So first I have my horizontal box, which is just a basic horizontal box. I didn't change anything in there. Then I have my size box, which I named the S box underscore image, because we want to change it dynamically, the size of the size box. So I also made it a variable right here in the top right corner. The default settings are set to 35 and 35 as width and height override. Then inside it, I have an image, which is just a random icon that I have in my project. So the icon run, chicken run, but it doesn't really matter because we're going to change it dynamically in the game. And actually, to be able to do that, we have to make sure that this component is a variable right here. So I named it image underscore image, and I've also made sure to check the is variable checkbox. Then on the right, I have my scale box containing my text, the same as before, and I added a little bit of padding right here on the left of my scale box, just so there's a little bit of space between the image and the text. And inside that, I have my last component, which is a text component. I made sure to make it a variable because we obviously want to change it dynamically in the game. So I named it the text underscore text, and I checked the is variable checkbox right here on the right. By default, I've set the size to 20, but we're also going to change that in the game dynamically. So let's go in the graph to do all the logic to be able to do that. So here, the first thing I'm going to do is create myself some new variable to be able to decide what we want to display on the image and the text. So let's create one new variable first. That one's going to be a texture 2D. I named it the image, and it's going to be the image we want to display on the image component. I made it instance editable and expose on spawn just so it's simpler to edit. Next, we also want to change what is written on the widget. So let's create a new variable for it. That one is going to be of type string, and I named it the text. That one is also instance editable and expose on spawn. Now we are able to change the image and what is written on the widget, but it will also be nice to change, let's say, the size of the image. So let's create a new variable for that one. I'm going to create myself a new variable of type vector 2D. I named it the image size and also instance editable and expose on spawn. That's going to decide the size of the image. And now it's time to change the size of the text. So I'm going to create myself one last variable. That one is going to be of type integer. I named it the text size and it is instance editable and expose on spawn again. So, okay, good. We now have all the variables we need. And while we're here, I'm just going to delete the construct and the tick because we're not going to use them, only the pre-construct. And now for the logic, it's actually pretty straightforward. The first step is to set the image we want to have on the widget. So I'm going to take my image underscore image component right there and do a set brush from texture. The texture is going to be the texture set in the image variable that we just created. So I'm going to take that variable and use it as a texture. Here we go, that's done. The next step is to change what is written on the widget. So I'm going to take my text underscore text variable right here and do a set text on it. We have to feed it the text we want to write on it. So I'm going to take my string variable named text right here. I'm going to feed it inside that function and it's going to change what is written on the widget. So now we have the right picture and the right text. Now the next step will be to change the size of the image using the size box that we have right here. So I'm going to take my size box and do a set width override and a set height override right here. So we're going to change both the width and the height of the widget based on the image size that we have right here. So I'm going to take my variable and connect it like so. So now the image is at the right size. The last step is to change the size of the text. So I'm going to take my text again and do a set font this time because we want to change the size of the font. But we don't want to change the whole font. We just want to change the size of the font. So I'm just going to take the previous font that was already there. I'm going to reconnect everything but the size. So the font family, material, outline setting, typeface, everything. We don't want to change any of that. We just want to change the size. So I'm just going to, for the size, take my variable text size on the left and connect it like so. Here we go. So now we should be done with the logic of the widget and we can go back in the designer to see how it looks. And yeah, it's pretty small, and that's just because we never set any of the default values of our new variables we created. So we have the image, text, the image size, and text size. They are all still using the default values, so we don't have any image, we don't have any text. The image size is 0 by 0, the text size is 0, so that's pretty small. So let's just add an image first. So let's say that one doesn't really matter, and add a bit of text because I don't have any text right now. So let's say my text. Here we go. Okay, it's still too small because the image size is still 0 by 0. So let's make it, let's say 35 by 35. Okay, that's a little bit bigger. That's good. We have the image right here. And then the text size, it's still 0. So let's put it to 20 by default. So now we have an image and a text and we can save all that. Here we go. So now we have a new widget component that we can reuse multiple places in the project. And it's super easy to change the image that is assigned to it and also the text that is written beside it. So now let's compile save this component and go use it inside the combat unit info right here to replace those two places right here where we have an image and a text written beside it. So I'm just going to search for my new component, the image with text, and drop it right here in the horizontal box. So here it is. I have it once and I want it a second time. Here we go. So now I have my two new components. They are pretty big, but it's still gonna work. I'm just going to change the icon and the text written beside it, and that should be good enough. So that one is for the action point. So text icon action point, that one is for the movement point, and I'm also going to change the text. Here we go. So now it's a little bit better. I renamed my both components right here on the left. So image underscore with text underscore AP for the action point and underscore MP for the movement point. And for both of them on the right, I've set the image. I've set the text on it. This one is 3, but doesn't really matter. We're going to change that a little bit later. Then we have the image size. It's 60 by 60 and the text size, it's 25. And it's the same thing for the other one. So the icon movement point, text 3, the image size 60 by 60 and the text size is 25. So, okay, it looks a little bit better, but now the other ones are a little bit squashed on the right, but that's not a problem because we're going to delete them. But before doing that, I'm just going to keep the spacer that is in between them. So I'm just going to move it in between my two new components. So there's a little bit of space in between them. And then for those components that are still on the right, we're just going to delete them. So I'm going to select all of them right here on the left and just press delete. Here we go. Now there's a gap, so I'm just going to select my both components right here and make them fill so they are using the whole space. Here we go. Now if we compile and save, okay, Unreal gives us a bunch of errors because we deleted some components that were used in the blueprint. So now I'm gonna go in the graph right here and we have to replace the text MP and the text AP using the two new components we just added instead. And that's actually super simple to do. Here on the left, we have the image with text, action point, and movement point. I'm just going to take both of them and put them in my graph and access the text component. And on that component, well, I'm just going to use it to do a set text instead of the previous component. So connect them like so, and you can delete the previous components. Here we go. Now we can compile, and that should work as expected. Perfect. So now we're done modifying our old widget. So we can close both of those, and it's now time to go create the new widget we want. And that new widget is going to be the widget we want to display when the user moves his mouse over any of the spell button to display all the spell information as a tooltip. So since it's related to the spells, I'm gonna go create that inside the spell widget folder right here. Going to create myself a new user interface widget blueprint, which I'm gonna name w_spell_info, and I'm going to open it real quick right here. And we're actually going to spawn it in game right away. So just to be able to see what's happening, I'm just going to delete my canvas and add myself a size box and a border with a dark color, the same dark color we are using everywhere else in the user interface. So I have a simple size box right here with a width override of 500 and a height override of 300. So the size of the tooltip, and inside it I have a border just so we have a background image that's going to show when we are spawning the tooltip in the game. And now to spawn the tooltip, we're gonna go in the button of our spell. So in the button spell, so let's open that one, and I'm gonna go directly in the graph. And here what we want to do is to create the tooltip when we create this button in the game. So I'm gonna go in the construct event. Actually, we don't have it, we just have the pre-construct. So I'm just going to create myself the construct right above it. So construct. There we go. And now when we construct the button, we want to construct the tooltip. So let's create a new widget. The widget is going to be the spell info widget, the one we just created. And then we have to use that widget to set the tooltip of our button. So I'm just going to take my button spell, which is right here on the left, and I'm going to do a set tooltip to set the button tooltip using the new widget we just created. Now if we compile and save, if we go in the game, when the user moves his mouse over any of the spell buttons, so let's say I'm going to go in my spell, in my select and cast spell right here, it should display the tooltip. Yeah, it seems to work. When I move my mouse over any of the spell button, I'm displaying a tooltip. Right now it doesn't have anything inside it. We're gonna change that, but at least the tooltip is working. That's good. So now we can focus on the design of the tooltip. So let's go back inside that widget and we're gonna do the interface we want to display. And that's how my tooltip is going to look like. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there, and I'm just going to go through all the components with you so you can reproduce it if you want to. So first we have the size box. I didn't change that, so it's still the same. Then I have my border, same thing again. Then inside that I have an horizontal box because I have two categories. I have the category on the left right here, which has the spell icon, the spell name, and the cost of the spell. I have an image in between just to have a nice separator. And then on the right I have the impact of the spell, so how much damage that's gonna do, what's the range, what's the cooldown, the maximum amount of time we can cast the spell during the turn. And if you want to see how it looks without all the grid lines right here, I'm just going to hide them. Here it is. So we can see here that we have a few images that are simply used as separator, just so it's a little bit nicer. Okay, good. So let's continue. I'm gonna start by the beginning. So I have my horizontal box. Inside it, I have a vertical box. You can see the padding on the right if you want to copy them. Then I have a simple image in between, just so we have a nice line. And then under that, I have another vertical box for the right side of the widget. But we're gonna start by the left side of the widget. So let's expand that one. And the first thing I have inside it is a scale box that contains the image icon, the spell icon. So inside the scale box, I have an image, which is the spell icon, and that spell icon image is the variable right here in the top right corner because we want to change it at runtime depending on the spell we want to display in the widget. Then under that I have another spell box right here that contains the spell name of the spell, so let's expand that one. Inside it I have a text underscore spell name, which is just a text component that is also a variable because we want to change it at runtime also. Then under that I have another horizontal box. This time I have three components in there. I have the image with text for the health point, the image with text for the action point, and then the image with text for the movement point. So here they are. We're gonna display all the costs of our spells. So good, make sure that all of them are also variables because we want to edit them at runtime. Perfect. Now I'm just going to collapse this left vertical box and I'm going to expand the right one. The top part right here is the damage we want to apply to the target, so I'm just going to expand it. The first component is an image with text that is going to display how many damage we're going to do to the target. Under that I have an horizontal box because we also want to display if we want to remove action point or movement point to the target also. So here they are. I have my image with text impact for the action point and for the movement point. Under that I have an image as a separator as I showed you at the beginning. Under that I have another vertical box, so let's expand that one also. Under this one I have two horizontal boxes. So the first one is for the range, so I'm going to expand it right here. I have two components. The first one is the image with text underscore range that's going to display the range of the spell, and on the right I added another image, the image underscore line of sight right here. So that's going to tell us if the spell requires the line of sight or not. And then under that first horizontal box right here I have a second horizontal box which is going to tell us if the spell is AoE or not, and that one is actually a variable. Make sure to make it a variable because we're just going to hide all of those elements in the case that the spell is not AoE. Okay, good. Inside that horizontal box we have the same thing as for the range, so I have a first image with text right here telling me the range AoE of the spell, and then I have the image of the line of sight in the case that the spell requires the line of sight for its AoE damage. Okay, now under that I have another image as a separator, and finally one last horizontal box. Inside the horizontal box I have two images with text right here. So I have the cooldown right here on the left, and then I have the maximum cast per turn. So that's all for what we had to do in the designer, but now we have to go in the graph because we have to set all those parameters by code depending on the spell we want to display. So we have to change the icon, the spell name, the cost of the spell, the damage of the spell, the range, the cooldown, the maximum cast per turn, and everything. So that's still a lot of work to do. So let's go in the graph to do that. And since it's a lot of work, I'm just going to create myself a new function because it's going to be a little bit cleaner. I name the function setSpell and I'm passing it the spell I want to set as input, so a spell variable right here. It is of type eSpell. Perfect. Now I'm just going to promote that into a new variable, so promote to variable right here. I have my variable on the left. It is named spell also, and I made it instance editable and expose on spawn, just so it's a little bit simpler for us to test it. Now I'm gonna go in the event graph to call my setSpell function right here in the pre-construct. So set my spell in the pre-construct using the spell that we have right here on the left that we can set in the editor so we can see the result right away. Perfect. Now I'm gonna go back in the set spell function because we have all the logic to do. And the first step is to retrieve the data of the spell, because right here we just have the spell. We need to have access to its data to be able to display it in the widget. So let's do a get spell data from spell using the spell. It's going to return us the spell data, which I can then promote to a new local variable right here that I named data. And now we can start displaying the spell information in the widget. So the first thing we're going to do is the spell icon, because that's super easy to do. So let's take the image spell icon and do a set brush from texture, and we're going to directly take the texture from the spell data. So right here we have the spell data, we have the asset, and we have the icon of the spell. That's going to change the icon in the user interface. And the second thing that is super easy to do is the name of the spell. So on my component the text spell name, I'm doing a set text right here, and I'm going to feed it the name of the spell. To do that, just make sure to convert the enum to a string before setting it inside the text component, otherwise it's not gonna work. Perfect. Now if I compile and save, I should already have some result in the designer, so let's go back in there and we can see that, okay, well, I don't have a spell icon anymore and I don't have the name of the spell either, and that's actually normal because if I go in my root right here, I should be able to change the default value of my spell right here. It's set to none by default, and now if I switch it to, let's say, /, now we can see that it displays the icon of the sword slash. And then it's the same thing if I change my spell for anything else. We can see that it seems to work. It changes the spell icon and also the text that is written under it. So that's pretty good. Okay, now we can go back in the graph and do all the other elements because we have a lot to do. So here I'm just gonna go on the right here, and we're gonna start with the requirements of the spell. So all the requirements needed to cast the spell. So the cost health point, movement point, action point, the maximum amount of time we can cast the spell during the turn, and the cooldown. And we're gonna start with the cost HP. So let's take it right here. I'm going to take my image with text underscore HP, which is the cost HP of the spell, and I'm going to convert also the cost HP to a string. Here we go. Now we can use that string to set the text written on that component. So to do that, I'm just going to take the text component right here and do a set text, feeding it the string, and that's it. So now the text should have the right text written on it. That's good. But now we have to do the same thing for all the other components, because we have a component for the movement point, action point, maximum cast per turn, cooldown, and everything. And so that's going to take a lot of code. So I'm just going to collapse that into a function just so it's a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to collapse to a function, name it the set text, and I'm also going to rename the variables. Here we go. So I renamed both my variable. The first one is image with text, and the second one is named text. Okay, good. So now I'm just going to give myself a little bit of room because I want to fit everything on one screen. So here it is. I'm going to call my set text function on all the other components associated with all the other parameters. So I'm going to do it like that. The first component I'm going to do is the image with text underscore MP for the movement point using the custom movement point. Then the same thing for the action point. So image with text AP for the action point, the maximum cast per turn, and finally the cooldown. Here we go. So now if we compile and save, we should now have the right numbers in the user interface. So let's go back in the designer right here, and we can see, okay, we have the run chicken run right now, which doesn't cost any health point, and same thing for the movement point. It doesn't cost any movement point, but it costs 1 action point. So it seemed to work, and same thing, the spell has 2 turn cooldown and a 999 maximum amount of time we can cast the spell during the turn. So that's good for the run chicken run. And then if we switch the spell, we can see that those numbers should be updated. So the sword throw, the sword slash, yeah, all the numbers gets updated properly. So that's good. There's just one thing though. I don't want that in the case that, let's say, this spell doesn't cost any movement point. I don't want to show the 0 right here. It's not pretty. Same thing if the spell didn't have any cooldown. I don't want to display the cooldown. The same thing if the spell have an infinite amount of maximum time it can be casted during the turn. I don't want to show the max right here. So what we're going to do is just hide those values if we don't need them. So if I don't need the custom movement point, I'm not going to display the icon or the number. Same thing for the cooldown, maximum, the cost health point, or the cost action point. So for all of those, I'm going to hide them if I don't need them. And to do that, I'm going to do it inside the set text function right here. Before changing the text that is written on the widget, I'm going to add myself a few conditions to check if we want to display the widget or not. And the way we're going to do that is simply by setting the visibility of the widget, the image with text, based on the text that we receive as input. So if we receive an empty string, well, we'd want to hide it because we don't want to display anything. That string is empty. Same thing if we receive the 0 or 999 as input. So in those cases, I'm just going to make the visibility collapse, which is going to hide the component. So I'm just going to reconnect this like so, and I'm also going to reconnect my image with text just like that. Here we go. So now everything should be hidden if those values are received as input. So let's compile and go back in the designer. And now for my healing spell, we can see that it doesn't cost any health point or movement point to be casted, so the values are hidden. Same thing for those values on the right here for the maximum amount of time we can cast during the turn, and also the cooldown, and those should reappear. Here we go if we need them. So this one has a maximum amount of time we can cast it during the turn, that one doesn't. The sword slash has some cooldown, the run chicken run has some cooldown also, the wind gust cost some movement point, and that seemed to work for all the different spells. Good, so that's it for the requirements of the spell. So now that's done. Now we just have to change the damage that the spell is going to do and also the range of the spell. So let's go back in the graph, and I'm gonna go in my set spell function, and I'm gonna go right at the end right here to add some new code in there. And now for the damage ranges, it's as simple as the previous one. So first we get the data from the structure. So here it is, I have my data, minimum, maximum, modifier, HP, MP, and AP, and we have to display it on the widget. So let's do a set text the same way we did before, as simple as that. But this time we cannot really plug the range directly inside the text. It's not gonna be pretty. So instead I'm just going to format it myself. So I'm going to do an append, appending the first integer to the second integer. So that's going to display the range of damage of the spell or healing or movement point, and that's going to generate a way nicer string. Perfect. So now, since we have to do that for all the other components, so for the range of movement point and action point, I'm going to also collapse that into a new function. So right click on it, collapse to function, which I'm going to name as get the range text. Here it is. And I'm going to make it pure. I'm also going to rename those two variables a little bit. Good, now the variables are renamed range and text, and it's way nicer already. That's good. So now we're done with the HP component, but before we go to the other components, so the modifier MP and AP components, we're gonna collapse those two nodes inside a new function because there's actually something else I want to change in the HP component. I also want to change the icon, not only the text. Right now I'm changing the text, but I also want to change the icon. Let's say, for example, if I'm doing healing, I want to display an icon of healing, but if I'm doing damage, I want to display an icon of damage. Same thing if I'm subtracting or adding action point and movement point. So what I'm going to do is just collapse those into a new function. So collapse to function, I'm going to name it the set impact text. I'm going to align it properly, and then inside this function, I'm going to open it, and we're going to add a little bit of logic to change the image icon. And to change the image, it's actually super simple. We just have to get the image component that is inside the widget and do a set brush from texture the same way we did at the beginning of the video. And for the texture, this time we're going to do a select based on the int point of the range we receive as input. Either X or Y, doesn't really matter. As long as one of these numbers is positive, we're going to display the positive icon. Otherwise, we're going to display the negative icon. So either the healing icon or the damage icon. And to decide which icon we want to use, since we're going to reuse that function for the health point, movement point, and action point, I'm going to feed it as input. So I'm just going to drag them at the beginning of my function right here and right there. And then I'm going to rename them positive and negative. Perfect. So that's done. Now we can go back in the set spell function and decide which icon we want to use for the impact health point. So positive, I'm going to use the healing icon that I imported at the beginning of the video. So TX icon heal, and for the negative, I have the damage icon, TX icon damage, and then we're gonna do the same thing for the other components. So we have the MP and the AP right here. For the icons, I'm using MP plus and MP minus that I imported at the beginning, and then AP plus and AP minus. Perfect. Now let's compile and go see the result in the designer. Okay, so that's good. This one does -2 to -3 damage. That's good. The impact for the action point is 0 to 0, so that's not good. I think we need to hide that in the case that we are not changing the action point. I don't think we need to show that icon right here. So, okay, we have that to fix. And then for the movement point, that's good. We are doing -1 to -2 movement point. Now let's see if I change my spell, the short range arrow. Okay, 0 to 0, 0 to 0. That one does damage. That's good. For the healing right here, I'm changing my icon to heal. So that's good. 2 to 3 instead of minus. That's pretty good too. Then I have the run chicken run, gives +2 to +6 movement point. And actually, I think I don't like having the minuses right here. So I have the -1 to -2 damage, but I'm already changing the icon to the damage icon. So I think I'm going to remove the minus signs. I think it's just not pretty enough. And we already have icons to know if it's positive or negative. So we're going to change that too. I'm going to go back in my graph, and the first thing I'm going to change is inside the set text right here. We want to hide the component in the case that we are displaying 0 to 0 also. So I'm just going to add myself another condition right here. And that's the condition. So if the text is equal to 0 to 0, we're going to collapse it also. Perfect. So that's done. We're not going to display any zeros anymore. And the second thing I want to change is inside the get range text right here. We want to make those two integer absolute. So we don't display the minus sign at the beginning. So I can just disconnect them and reconnect them like so with an absolute in between. Perfect. Now let's go in the designer and we can see that. Okay, good. Now we are doing 1 to 2 damage because it's using the damage icon. And then I'm going to switch. Okay, 2 to 5 damage, /4 to 6. The heal is 2 to 3 healing. That's good. Run chicken run gives +2 to +4 movement point because of the icon. Wind gust does 2 to 3 damage and -1 to -1 action point. That's good. That's exactly what we want. And the last thing we have to do is those range values right here. So let's go back in the graph once again. I'm going to go in my set the spell again, and I'm going to go all the way at the end right here. And now for the range, the first thing I'd like to do is to change the image that is beside the text, depending on the range pattern. So if the spell range is a star, we're going to display a star. If it's a square, we're going to display a square. And to do that, we simply have to do a set brush from texture on the image with text for the range using the image. And for the texture, we're simply going to do a select based on the range pattern. And for the icons, I used all the different icons I already imported in the past and also the ones that I imported at the beginning of the video. So my icon pattern line right here for the line, icon pattern diagonal, icon pattern half diagonal, star, diamond, and square. So here are all my icons that I'm using, and they are going to switch depending on the range pattern. Then we have to change the text that is written beside the image. So let's do that the same way we did before. So image with text for the range, using the text component, doing a set text, and we already have a function to convert the range to a text like so, get range text. And then we can convert it to a text and set it inside the component. Perfect. The last thing I'd like to do though is, if I go back in the designer right here, we can see that we have the little eye icon, and that's supposed to display the line of sight. So if the spells requires the line of sight, I'm going to make this little eye icon visible, otherwise I'm going to hide it. So let's go back in the graph right here, and I'm going to change the visibility of my little eye icon right here. So the image range line of sight, I'm going to change the visibility based on if the spell requires the line of sight or not. So to check that, I'm just going to break the line of sight structure, check if the spell requires the line of sight. If so, I'm going to make it visible, otherwise it's going to be collapsed. And that should be good for the range of the spell. Now it's time to do the same thing, but for the AoE of the spell. So let's go on the right here a little bit. And we're going to do the same thing, but for the cast AoE structure this time, not the cast structure, the cast AoE. So for the range pattern, same thing. We want to change the icon. So let's set the brush from texture on the image on the image with text range AoE this time. And I'm going to do a select once again, but this time for my icons, I'm using the icons underscore AoE. So icon underscore pattern underscore line underscore AoE, icon pattern diagonal AoE, icon half diagonal AoE, star underscore AoE, diamond underscore AoE, and square underscore AoE. There we go. So that's going to change the icon. Now same thing for the text. So let's just do a set text using the range min max. And finally the same thing for the line of sight. So I'm taking my little eye icon right here. I'm going to set its visibility based on if the AoE of my spell requires the line of sight or not. So that should be good. I'm going to compile save and now go back in the designer. And actually, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to show you. In the case that the spell is not AoE, we can see that it is a little bit broken. My icon is broken on the right, and also the text is broken. We should just simply hide all of that. And that's why at the beginning I told you to set that horizontal box to be a variable, because we want to hide the horizontal box in the game if the spell is not AoE at all. So I'm gonna go back in the graph to hide that horizontal box. So I'm gonna go all the way at the end right here, and I'm going to set the visibility of my horizontal box range AoE based on if the spell has an AoE or not. And to check that, I'm just going to check inside the cast AoE if the range pattern is equal to none. If it's equal to none, it means that it's not an AoE spell, so we can simply set it to collapsed. Otherwise, it's going to be visible, and that's fine. So let's compile and go see back in the designer, and here we go. Now this spell is not AoE, so we are hiding the AoE line of our widget. And then I can switch for all the other spells and see if they work, because I'm actually done with this widget for now. So if I toggle between them, we can see that everything seems to work as expected. All the ranges, all the line of sight icon, and the other variables seems to be right. Perfect. So now let's compile and save, and we're done with this widget. We can now see the result in the game, but there's just one last little thing. Right now, all the widgets in the game are going to display the wind gust because it's going to be the default variable, and that's not good. So I'm just going to go back in the button spells, and right here, when we are creating the widget and we are assigning it to the tooltip, we can specify which spell we want to use. So I'm just going to use the same spell as the button. So the spell on the left, I'm going to drag it right here. There we go. So now the spell should be right in the game. So let's compile, save, go play. I'm going to look at my spell. So here it is. I have my melee, my sword slash, sword throw, and all my other spells, and they seems to work perfectly. So that's pretty good. And I'm just going to check if they work in the game also. I mean in combat. So I'm going to add a few units. If I look at my spells at the bottom, we can see that, yeah, it seems to work. I'm going to switch to go to my slime, and we can see that, yeah, it seems to work. So that's pretty good. But now I still have one last thing to do before ending today's video, and it is to make this widget a little bit less aggressive. Right now, if I start hovering the button, the widget spawns right away, so that's pretty aggressive. Because we can see that if I try to cast a spell, for example, the widget tooltip appears right away, so I don't have time to just go down and click on the spell and then cast it, and it's pretty annoying, I think, that it appears right away. I think it would be better if the widget waited a little bit, like let's say the half a second, 1 second, like that way the user is going to have the time to go click on the button without displaying the pop-up every time, because that's a bit annoying, I think. So I'm just gonna stop, and that's gonna be inside the spell info. So let's go there. I'm gonna go in the graph, and I'm gonna go do that in the event graph. Actually, I think it would be even nicer if we make the widget fade in instead of just popping in. So I'm just gonna go back in the designer first to create myself a little bit of an animation to make it fade in. So a new animation right here, I named it anim_opacity, and then inside that I'm going to animate my size box right here. So let's add a new track for the size box, and then in the tracks I'm going to animate the render opacity because I want to fade the whole widget, and then I'm going to add myself a few keys in there. Okay, so I have 3 keys. I have one at the beginning that is 0 because we want to start hidden, and then we're gonna wait 0.5 seconds and still having a key at 0, so it's still hidden at 0.5 seconds, a little bit of a delay before spawning in. And then after that, we're gonna start fading in the widget until 1 second. So at 1 second, it's going to be completely visible. At the beginning, it's hidden until 0.5 seconds, and then it's going to start fading in until it's completely visible. Perfect. That should be way nicer than just popping it in the game. Now, one last thing before we go back in the graph, I'm just going to rename my size box right here. So sizebox_opacity, and I'm going to make it a variable that is going to be accessible in the graph also. So let's go back in there for reals this time. And here the first thing I'm going to do is to simply set my sizebox opacity, default opacity at the beginning of the game to be 0, so it's completely hidden at the beginning. That way we're sure it's never gonna pop. And now the final step is simply to play the animation when the widget starts to be visible in the game. And that's actually more complicated than it sounds because there's no event telling us that the widget starts to be visible in the game. So yeah, that's not cool, and it forced me to think a little bit, and that's never fun, so yeah. Anyway, I decided to use the tick to determine when the widget starts to be visible in the game, because the event tick is only called when the widget is visible. So as soon as the widget starts to be visible, the tooltip starts to appear on screen, the event tick is called. So what I did is just that big thing right here. Yeah, that's not nice. But in short, the only thing it does is simply calling the hello once at the beginning as soon as the widget starts to be visible. And then it's simply going to call the bye only once when the widget is hidden in the game. So let's compile and go see how it looks in the game, just to make sure that my code actually works. So I'm going to go in my spell right here, and I'm going to move my mouse over the first spell. Okay, we can see in the log in the bottom right corner that it says hello. And now if I remove my mouse, okay, it says bye, hello, bye, hello, bye. So it seemed to work, and if I move my mouse super fast over all the other buttons, we can see that it spams hello and bye only once per button. So that's exactly what we want. We want to start playing the animation when we move the mouse on top of the button, and then stop playing the animation when the mouse is removed from the button. So we're gonna use that to play and stop the animation. So let's go back in there, and I'm going to replace the print string by the new logic we need to do. And here it is. So when the widget gets visible in the game, we're simply going to play the animation. So the anim opacity, we're going to play it. And then when the widget is hidden in the game, we're going to simply stop the animation. We don't need it anymore. And then we're going to set the render opacity back to 0. Perfect. So that should fix the issue. Here we go. So now we have the spell buttons at the bottom, and we can see that after a few seconds, the widget starts to fade in, and that's pretty nice. So now I have the time to go click on my button and cast a spell if I want to before the widget starts to appear. So that's pretty good. It's less aggressive, and it feels more like I have time to do my action, and then I can go back and see, okay, that spell costs 2 action points, and it does between 1 and 2 damage, and that's pretty good. Like, it's pretty nice to know how much damage the spell does, because it's a tactical game, and that's pretty useful information for the player. So yeah, I guess the user interface is pretty good for now, and that's going to conclude today's video. So I'm gonna see you in the next one. So bye bye!